Back when I was around 17, I stayed late after school with some friends to use the computer lab for gaming. In our area, fast internet and high-end systems were rare luxuries, so these sessions were a big deal for us. We played till the school caretaker, tired of waiting, began switching off the mains to kick us out. It was November, and by the time we left, the skies were pitch dark, with only the dim street lights guiding our way home. As I walked down the unpaved street of our neighborhood in Lagos, all the street lights suddenly went off. It was so abrupt that I froze. The houses around were dark too. Power outages, or light off, weren't uncommon here, but something about the complete blackout felt strange. It was like the entire area had been swallowed by the night. I tried calling a friend to confirm if his area was affected too, but the network wasn't connecting. The robotic voice repeating, "Please try again later," only added to my unease. Left in the dark, literally and figuratively, I felt too restless to stay home alone. My parents were still out, so I decided to walk to a friend's house nearby. The street was alive with murmurs as neighbors spilled out of their compounds, holding lanterns and rechargeable lamps, wondering what was going on. The darkness was eerie, the kind that made you feel watched. The only lights came from occasional car headlights navigating the chaos of the traffic jams that sprang up at intersections without traffic lights. I finally reached my friend's place, but their power was out too. Since staying indoors felt suffocating, we decided to take a walk to the main road. As we strolled, we bumped into other friends who had also come out to explore the unusual blackout. Despite the tension, being together turned the eerie atmosphere into something thrilling. That excitement, however, didn't last. Not everyone saw the darkness as just an inconvenience. We heard the shouts first, a shopkeeper yelling as three guys dashed out of his corner store. They'd used the blackout as cover to loot. The shopkeeper, clutching a wooden plank, chased after them, shouting threats. It dawned on us just how dangerous the situation was. The darkness meant no streetlights, no alarms, and no police presence. Lagos traffic had them stuck. Shopkeepers began pulling down their shutters, some armed with sticks or machetes. Drivers who'd collided at junctions got into heated arguments, their voices echoing through the night. We decided it was best to move away from the commotion. We ended up at an abandoned football field near the river, a spot we often used to hang out. Normally lit by floodlights, it was now cloaked in shadows. The only light came from the moon and the faint glow of our phone screens. It was so dark that anyone could sneak up on us unnoticed. One of my friends suddenly whispered, "Did you hear that?" We froze, straining our ears. Silence. Then another sound, closer this time. My friend swore he saw something move near the bushes, but we laughed it off as paranoia. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, someone grabbed one of us in a chokehold. At first, we thought it was a prank until the screams started. The figure was a stranger, and within seconds, more shadows emerged from the darkness. Chaos erupted as we tried to fight back, but we were outnumbered. I remember being punched and hitting the ground, pain exploding in my side as kicks rained down on me. Through the confusion, I heard someone shout, "He's not moving! He's dead!" Panic set in among our attackers, and they fled into the night. When I opened my eyes, I saw my friends crawling toward a limp figure on the ground. My heart sank, thinking we'd lost someone. But then he groaned, a faint, painful sound. He wasn't dead, just unconscious. We carried him to safety, all of us nursing bruises and split lips. That night taught me something terrifying. The thin thread holding society together can snap in an instant. In the darkness, the true monsters among us emerge, not creatures of folklore, but people willing to prey on their neighbors. For them, the blackout wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an opportunity, and we were their prey. It was a chilly night in early March a couple of years ago. I had just gotten home after a long day of work in Lagos. It was nearly midnight, and I was completely worn out. The traffic had been terrible, and the stress from my job weighed heavily on me. All I wanted was to grab a cold drink, kick back in my armchair, and let the evening slip away. I didn't even bother turning on the TV at first. I just closed my eyes, savoring the brief silence while my feet rested on the coffee table. After a few moments, I decided to find something to watch, flipping through channels with little patience. Nothing caught my attention. Frustrated, I gave up and resigned myself to the quiet, something that always felt hard to come by in this chaotic city. Just as I started to relax, all the lights in the house went out. That sudden, eerie silence that follows power outages settled over the house, unsettling me. Power outages were common in the area, and I had grown used to dealing with them. My first thought was to check if my neighbors' houses were affected. I stepped outside, shutting the door quickly behind me to avoid letting in the cold. I glanced down the street and noticed a house still lit up. Clearly, this wasn't a general outage. It was just my house. I turned back to go inside, but when I tried the handle, the door wouldn't open. Frowning, I tried again, jiggling it harder this time. It was locked. Confused, I knocked on the door, calling out my wife's name. No response. Trying not to panic, I hurried to the back door. Locked. That's when my chest tightened. My wife rarely locked that door if I wasn't home yet. Something wasn't right. I decided to check the breaker box at the side of the house, and that's when I noticed it. The garden hose, which I had neatly arranged earlier, was now uncoiled and sprawled on the ground. It hit me instantly. Someone had tampered with the power. My heart started racing as I darted to the nearest window, pressing my face against the glass. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. But then I saw them. Two beams of light darting around the house, flashlights, intruders. I instinctively reached for my pocket to grab my phone, but cursed when I remembered leaving it inside on the couch. I needed help, but just as I turned to run to a neighbor's house, a chilling thought gripped me. My wife was still inside. She had to be asleep, completely unaware of what was happening. There was no way I could leave her in there. I grabbed some stones from the ground and began throwing them at our bedroom window, aiming carefully to avoid smashing it. After a few attempts, she opened the window, startled. "Stay quiet," I whispered urgently. "There are people in the house. Hide in the closet, now." She didn't hesitate, disappearing instantly. I sprinted to my neighbor's house, banging on their door with a sense of desperation. After quickly explaining the situation, they handed me a phone and I called the police. My hands shook as I waited on their porch, praying my wife would stay hidden and safe. The police arrived and entered the house, but it was too late. The back door was wide open and the thieves were gone, along with several valuables. My wife was deeply shaken. What she told me afterward left me furious at myself for not being able to protect her better. She said moments after she hid, she heard the bedroom door being kicked open. She described hearing the chilling sound of a gun being cocked. The intruder stood silently in the room, as if listening for any movement before leaving abruptly. To this day, I can't shake the memory of that night. We still live in that house, but I often think about how different things could have been if I hadn't stepped outside when I did. I'm a 20-year-old man from a small town in Nigeria. My family has struggled financially for as long as I can remember. Things were a bit better when my father was around, but he had a habit of getting into trouble. Eventually, he left us for good when I was 12. My mother was left alone to raise me and my older sister. We relied heavily on her resilience and resourcefulness to get by. During school breaks, my maternal grandmother would look after us. By the time I turned 15, I started working alongside school to support the family, as my sister had already been doing. Despite the challenges, I managed to graduate with good grades. While I considered furthering my education, I couldn't ignore the sacrifices my mother made. So, I decided to work full-time to ease her burden. My goal was to save enough to rent a better place where we could all have our own space. For 3 years, I endured sleeping on the couch in a crowded apartment, even sharing the place with 2 other tenants. It wasn't ideal, but I reminded myself it could have been worse. At one point, all 3 of us shared a single room. I knew how important privacy was for my mom and sister, so I willingly made sacrifices. After weeks of searching, I found an affordable apartment that met our basic needs. It wasn't perfect, the plumbing was faulty, and the fixtures were outdated, but it was ours. The day we moved in, we were hopeful. However, it wasn't long before problems started piling up, particularly with our neighbors. The family next door was loud and careless. Their kids roamed around unsupervised, often coming to our door asking for food. Their parents even locked them outside at times, leaving them to cause a ruckus in the compound. I felt bad for the kids, but it was frustrating nonetheless. The biggest issue, however, was a neighbor named Marcel. He lived across from us and spent most of his days lounging outside on a plastic chair, smoking and watching people. His interest in my sister became clear immediately. She ignored his advances at first, knowing how to handle unwelcome attention. But Marcel's behavior escalated, especially when she started seeing someone. One night, things took a dangerous turn. Marcel got into a confrontation with my sister's boyfriend, forcing her to avoid him entirely. Despite this, he continued to ask about her. Then the power went out in our compound and everything changed. The electricity had been disconnected because the property management hadn't paid the bills. My mom suggested we stay at a nearby hotel while sorting things out. As we packed, my sister went outside to load the car. Suddenly, I heard her screaming for help. I ran out to find Marcel trying to subdue her with duct tape. My sister fought back fiercely, but he was too strong. Without hesitation, I kicked Marcel in the face, knocking him to the ground. My sister ran to the car while I ensured Marcel was no longer a threat. We drove straight to the police station where we reported the assault. The officers took her statement, documented her injuries, and eventually arrested Marcel. Thankfully, he remains in custody as of now. The incident sparked a chain reaction among the tenants. Many reported other issues with the property management, including flooding, sewage backups, and overall neglect. The compound was declared a health hazard, and everyone was forced to relocate. We've since found another apartment in a better area. It's still small, but it's a step forward. For now, my focus is on keeping my family safe and working toward a brighter future. I dream of one day buying a proper house for my mom, something she hasn't had since childhood. She's sacrificed so much for us, and it's the least I can do. I live in the UK, but this story happened to a friend of a colleague at work. Her boyfriend, a Nigerian guy, shared it with her after hearing it from someone at his church. It happened to the sister of a friend who took the last train home a couple of weeks ago. When she boarded, she noticed 5 empty rows, but at the very last row, there were 3 people sitting together. Feeling a bit shy and uneasy about sitting too close, she chose a seat directly opposite them. As she settled down, she realized that one of the women sitting across from her was staring at her. The stare wasn't casual. It was intense, almost piercing. Uncomfortable, she pulled out a book to distract herself, but every time she glanced up, the woman's eyes were still fixed on her. At the next station, a man got on the train. He walked up and down the aisle, quickly scanning the carriage. He glanced at her, then at the three people in the back row, and without hesitation, came to sit next to her. Leaning close, he whispered in her ear, "If you value your life, get off this train at the next stop with me." Fear gripped her. She didn't know whether to trust him or not, but something in his voice and demeanor made her decide it was best to comply. As the train approached the next station, she got off with him. Once they were on the platform, the man let out a sigh of relief. "I'm so sorry if I scared you," he said, "but I'm a doctor. The woman sitting opposite you is dead, and the two men beside her were holding her up to make it look like she was alive." Shocked and trembling, she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. They immediately alerted the station officials, who called the police. The train was stopped at the next station, and investigations confirmed the doctor's chilling observation.